Hi, and welcome to my almost brand new booktube channel, Reading Closely. With the holidays upon us, I wanted to talk about a really wonderful Christmas book that I've become aware of, and that is Truman Capote's A Christmas Memory. And this is a modern library edition. It actually contains not only A Christmas Memory, but two other works that I think are also really interesting, also holiday related, one focused on Thanksgiving and the other also on Christmas. And I want to talk about all three of those stories. They're all short stories, very readable, and all of them are autobiographical fiction. They're based on Truman Capote's memories of his childhood growing up in the area of Monroeville, Alabama, rural Alabama in the early 1930s or thereabouts. And A Christmas Memory, the main story, introduces us to this very special relationship that he has with an elderly cousin. I think taken together, these stories would make really interesting reading, although they're written for adults. I think that they could make really interesting reading for a young person, say between ages 10 and 17. They're fairly simply written, I would say deceptively simple in terms of the style, but pretty deep, and they also concern things that I think young people are very much thinking about today. So one of them has to do with bullying, another has to do with estranged families, the basic sort of nuclear family unit being disrupted, and then another has to do with surrogate families. So when that happens, how is a new family formed from beyond the nuclear family? This is only my third video ever, so I hope you'll bear with me. I've made a couple of videos earlier in the fall, and to be honest, have not been very satisfied with them. I feel like they're really sort of stiff, and although they're informative and I recommend you watch them, I also don't really like the style. So for this video, I decided to do something different and just be less rehearsed and unscripted and see how it goes. So what I'll do, I have a tendency to want to correct myself a lot, and that can be a frustration for somebody who is especially, I think, really new at videoing. And so what I've told myself I can do, I've given myself permission just to plow ahead, and then later I've decided I can edit the video and make the corrections that I want to. So I will, if that happens, if I've made a mistake or something that I have a really strong urge to correct, I'm going to signal it by giving you like a little title line somewhere around here and asking you to look below in the description box, and that's where I will correct whatever I said wrong. But before talking about this particular set of stories, I also want to say a little bit about Truman Capote himself, because I think he was a really fascinating person, both as a personality and as a writer. And so I want to tell you a little bit about him and what I've learned about him since I started reading some of his fiction. I'm a little concerned that this video might get to be too long, and if it does, then what I'm going to do is break it in two, and this first video will be focused on Truman Capote and his biography, and then a second video will focus on this book. Truman Capote lived from 1924 to 1984, so his life basically spans the middle years of the 20th century, and it forms a kind of interesting and sad arc, I would say. So he starts out in childhood, very obscure childhood with no indications that he's going to become a writer or anything. And then in his youth, he attains really the greater and greater success as a writer. And then in sort of middle age, he becomes a true celebrity. Most literate people in the U.S. know about his works, and he's very widely read. And then towards the end of his life, in the last, I guess, 10 or maybe 15 years, he goes through a kind of very public decline where not only does he seem to dry up creatively, but he becomes kind of a parody of himself or something. You'll see him you can see videos, YouTube videos of Truman Capote in his later years on talk shows. And as he kind of has this personal meltdown, he does it in a really public way that's painful to watch. But I feel like we all should be remembered, I guess, for sort of our best moments. And so I want to focus on some of his wonderful early fiction. The first book that he wrote is Other Voices, Other Rooms. And he wrote this in 1948. It's very autobiographical. And in fact, he described it later as an unconscious attempt to exorcise demons. It's got some really rich language. He seems to be constantly playing with figurative language, metaphor, and simile. And at times it's wonderful. It feels very lush, and but at other times it feels like almost a bit too much, like a creative writing student who is oh, there's the phone. I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get it, and I'll be right back. Anyway, as I was saying, we were talking about this book, or I was talking about this book, Other Voices, Other Rooms, and the style of writing. It's been categorized as Southern Gothic, and I think Gothic fiction in all of its manifestations is really fascinating. So in some future video, I might talk about Gothic fiction and the different permutations it takes, both in the British Isles and then also as it comes to the U.S. But anyway, so that's Other Voices, Other Rooms, his first novel. Truman Capote is probably best known for Breakfast at Tiffanys, which was written in 1958 and of course made into that famous film with Audrey Hepburn. And I'm looking over here because I can't resist showing you my Breakfast at Tiffanys tea mug. So there it is, and there's the lovely Audrey Hepburn in that role. I think the movie has some problems, although I love her in it, and she's just beautiful and elegant and just exquisite. So in her honor, I'm drinking out of this cup today. And I'm thirsty right now, so I'm going to take a drink. I won't say much about Breakfast at Tiffanys right now because I hope to return to that in some later video and talk about both the story and the film and maybe do a kind of comparison. But anyway, Audrey Hepburn plays this wonderful character, Holly Golightly, which I feel is kind of like a female Great Gatsby. And I'll talk more about that, I hope, in some later video. Moving on, Truman Capote probably reached his peak, actually, with the true crime work called In Cold Blood. That was published in 1965, and it really propelled him to celebrity and fame. So when I said he's best known for Breakfast at Tiffanys, I guess it's between that and In Cold Blood. I feel like maybe now In Cold Blood has sort of faded a bit into the background, and Breakfast at Tiffanys because of the movie, and it was mentioned in a song. I can't remember what that song was, but maybe 10 years ago there was a pop song mentioning Breakfast at Tiffanys. Anyway, I feel like that strand of his work has maybe been sort of survived a little longer than In Cold Blood. I have not read In Cold Blood myself, and so I'm not going to say anything about it, other than I know that it was it was supposed to be a very original, innovative way of telling a true crime story. It reads apparently in a very novelistic style, And what little I do know about it, I know from the movie Capote, which starred Philip Seymour Hoffman and was actually about Capote's writing, research and writing of In Cold Blood. I've saved the most interesting thing about Truman Capote for the last of the biographical part of this video. And to me, the most remarkable thing is that he was a longtime friend of Harper Lee, author of the famous To Kill a Mockingbird, one of the great American novels. And not only that, but he was the basis for the character Dill in the novel. So Dill actually appears already on the very first page when Scout, the narrator, is talking about how many years later she and her brother Jem are thinking back about the events that take place and that she tells about in the novel. She begins by talking about when Jem broke his elbow many years before. And then she says, when enough years had gone by to enable us to look back on them, we sometimes discussed the events leading to his accident. I maintain that the Ewells started it all, but Jem, who was 4 years my senior, said it started long before that. He said it began the summer Dill came to us, when Dill first gave us the idea of making Boo Radley come out. So if you know the story, you know, of course, who Boo Radley was and how important he was to the plot of the story. A few pages later, Harper Lee tells us, or rather her character, her narrator, Scout, tells us, Dill was from Meridian, Mississippi, was spending the summer with his aunt, Miss Rachel, and would be spending every summer in Macomb from now on. Now Macomb is the fictitious town that is based on Monroeville, Alabama. Thus we came to know Dill as a pocket Merlin, whose head teemed with eccentric plans, strange longings, and quaint fancies. I think that gives you just a little sort of foreshadowing of what Dill is like in this story, and also hints a little bit about what Truman Capote, the real life figure on which Dill was based, what he was like in real life. The 3 stories in this collection also take place in Monroeville, Alabama, and they tell the story, I guess you could say, of Dill from Dill's own perspective. That's one thing I think that's really interesting about them.